The phone was still warm against my ear when I smiled. "You're free anyway," she'd said, her voice sharp as glass. "You can watch my kids while I travel." Outside, the Savannah heat pressed against the windows, thick as syrup. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stared at the travel brochure I'd left open on the kitchen table. Charleston, St. Augustine, D.C. I'd been saving for that trip since my 30s, but at that moment, I made a different kind of promise. One she would never forget. My name is Loretta Carter, 68 years old, born and raised right here in Savannah, Georgia. I used to teach history at Booker Elementary, back when kids still looked you in the eye and said, "Yes, ma'am," without rolling it. For 40 years, I taught other people's children to be curious, kind, and brave. When I retired last month, the principal gave me a gold clock. I keep it on the mantle now, ticking loud enough to remind me how fast time runs once it's finally yours. Retirement was supposed to feel like freedom. I had it all planned. I'd start in Charleston, walk those cobblestone streets I used to teach about, then drive up to Washington to see the monuments I'd only shown in pictures. I even bought a new suitcase, red, with smooth wheels and a little tag that said, "Property of Loretta C." But dreams, I've learned, have a way of waiting too long. The day Vanessa called, I'd just finished watering the plants on my porch. The azaleas were blooming early, pink and proud, and I thought, maybe this is what peace looks like. Then the phone rang, and her voice came through, sweet and cutting at once. She didn't ask, she announced. "Marcus is busy. I need a break. You can keep the kids for a few weeks." I told her I had plans, but she laughed. "You? Traveling? Come on, you're retired. You don't have anything to do." That laugh stuck under my skin like a thorn. I said, "Send them over," and ended the call. She thought she'd won. She always did. The truth is, Vanessa has been testing me for years, treating my kindness like weakness, my silence like consent. Marcus, my only boy, stands between us like a bridge that's always on fire. I don't blame him. I raised him to keep the peace. But sometimes, peace costs too much. When my husband passed away, Marcus was 12. I worked double shifts, taught night classes, stretched every dollar to give him a future. I told myself it was worth it because one day, when life slowed down, I'd travel, rest, maybe find out who I was beyond mother and teacher. I never imagined the people I loved most would forget that I'm still a person too. The next morning, the air smelled of rain. I packed away my brochures, folded the new maps I'd bought, and put the red suitcase back in the closet. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like preparation, like something inside me had woken up and was waiting for the right moment to move. When the SUV pulled into my driveway that Friday afternoon, I watched from the porch. Vanessa didn't even get out. The back door opened and 3 little faces stared at me. Jaden, Naomi, and Caleb, all wearing matching sneakers and boredom. Vanessa waved once, her sunglasses hiding the eyes that never saw me. "Thanks, Loretta," she said, as if I were a hired hand. Then she drove away. The house filled with noise. Bags hit the floor, shoes scattered. Someone complained there was no Wi-Fi signal strong enough for their games. I stood still, listening, feeling the weight of their chaos against the quiet I had just learned to love. Then I smiled again, not out of kindness, but clarity. I didn't know exactly what lesson I was going to teach her, only that this time it would be the kind that stays. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. The morning after the kids arrived, I woke earlier than usual. Savannah light has a way of slipping into your kitchen before the coffee's even brewed. Soft and golden, like forgiveness you haven't earned yet. I sat by the window, staring at the stack of brochures I hadn't had the heart to throw away. Charleston, Richmond, Washington. I'd drawn a line on the map once, tracing the route of my dream road trip. It looked like freedom in ink form. Now it just looked like a wound that refused to heal. For most of my adult life, I told myself that when I finally retired, I would see the places I used to teach about, the Freedom Trail, Harriet Tubman's paths, the old universities built by hands like mine, but not meant for me. I wanted to walk through history and breathe where strong women once stood, but retirement had turned out quieter than I expected. The first few weeks were nice. Coffee on the porch, long walks near Forsyth Park, no papers to grade. Then the silence settled in. It was the kind that made you hear your own regrets walking around the room. Marcus would call sometimes, between meetings, his voice rushing. "How's everything, Mama? You getting rest?" I'd say yes, though rest without purpose feels like waiting for something that never comes. When he mentioned Vanessa's name, my chest always tightened a little. I knew she didn't like me, not my cooking, not my questions, not the way I refused to flatter her. I wasn't polished enough for her friends, or quiet enough for her ego. But I tried. Lord knows I tried. The day she called with that demand, I felt something snap, softly, like a thread that had been stretched too long. For years, I'd let her treat me like a background character in my own family. I told myself it was for Marcus's peace, for the children's stability. But sitting there that morning, hearing their footsteps thunder upstairs while my suitcase sat buried in the closet, I realized peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's surrender. By mid-morning, Jaden came downstairs, sleepy-eyed and sullen. "Mom says you don't have cable," he muttered. "How are we supposed to live here?" Naomi followed, clutching her tablet, asking if there was Wi-Fi. Caleb just wanted pancakes, like the ones from the diner. I smiled at them, not kindly, but calmly. "We'll manage," I said. "But first, y'all need to wash your hands and help set the table." They looked at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. That breakfast told me everything I needed to know. They weren't bad kids, they were lost, floating in a house that ran on convenience and absence. Every bite of syrup-covered pancake came with a complaint. Every glance at me carried a test I didn't bother to fail. I'd spent 40 years in classrooms full of restless children. These three were no different. Only this time, I wasn't just teaching them manners. I was teaching myself something too, how to reclaim space in my own life. Later, when I called Marcus to tell him they'd arrived, he sounded distracted. "Vanessa said you were fine with it," he said, almost relieved. I could hear office chatter in the background, the hum of a man trying not to think too hard. "Of course," I told him. "We'll be fine." He didn't hear the pause between those words. After the call, I looked around my living room. The toys scattered across the rug, the open backpack, the sound of cartoons echoing from a tablet. It all felt temporary, like a storm that had just arrived. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger burns fast and dies. What I felt was steadier, older. It was resolve. Outside, a thunderstorm rolled in from the coast, washing the air clean. I watched the rain slide down the window pane and thought, maybe this is how it begins. Not with shouting, but with quiet. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for sure. This time, the lesson wouldn't be mine to learn. By the third day, I started to notice how much my house didn't sound like mine anymore. The steady rhythm of children's voices filled every room, arguing, laughing, running, calling for snacks. It was strange, almost like the ghosts of my old students had returned, smaller and louder than memory. But beneath all that noise, there was another kind of quiet, the one that came from Marcus's absence. I hadn't seen my son in nearly 2 months. Before that, his visits had become shorter each time. A quick weekend, a dinner half-eaten, promises that he'd come by soon. I told myself he was busy, a hard-working man trying to build a better life. But lately, I had begun to wonder whether busy was just another word for gone. When Marcus was little, he used to sit beside me at the kitchen table while I graded papers. I can still see him there, his knees swinging, his pencil tapping as he asked, "Mama, why do you always help the slow kids first?" I told him, "Because they're the ones who need it most, baby. Anybody can love what's easy." He smiled then, that same shy grin he still wears when he doesn't want me to know he's proud. Somewhere between childhood and marriage, I lost that version of him. That afternoon, after putting Caleb down for a nap, I found myself scrolling through my phone, hovering over his number. I wanted to tell him about the children, how Naomi had cried after spilling her juice, how Jaden had softened when I taught him to fry an egg, how Caleb clung to my arm during a thunderclap, but I didn't. He would have said, "Thanks for handling it, Mama," and gone right back to his meeting. Instead, I texted, "They're settled in, all good here." He answered almost immediately, "Appreciate you, Mom. Vanessa says you're a lifesaver." I stared at the screen for a long time. A lifesaver. Not loved, not missed, just useful. Later, when Naomi sat beside me coloring, she asked, "Grandma, why don't you come to our house anymore?" I smiled, pretending I didn't feel that sting. "Because your mama and daddy live far away, honey." She looked up, confused. "Daddy says you make mama nervous." I laughed softly, but inside, something shifted. It was one thing to be ignored, another to be rewritten. That night, while the kids slept, I took out my old photo albums. Marcus as a baby in the church pew, Marcus with his first book report, Marcus on graduation day. Every picture showed a boy I'd built my world around. And then, somewhere after his wedding, the pages thinned out. The story of us just stopped. I sat there under the lamp's yellow light, listening to the crickets outside, and whispered, "What happened to you, my boy?" I thought about all the times I'd told him to choose love carefully, to never confuse kindness with weakness. Maybe he had learned that lesson from the wrong person. The next morning, Vanessa posted a photo online, her hand holding a champagne glass, ocean in the background. The caption read, "Finally, some peace." I looked at it for a long moment, not out of envy but realization. She was on vacation, yes, but peace wasn't what she'd found. Peace was here, in this messy house, with these children she'd left behind and the woman she underestimated. When Marcus called that evening, I answered. His voice was tired but polite. "Everything all right there, Mama?" "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine." Then I added, "You know, son, sometimes the things we ignore grow into something we can't control." He was quiet for a second, uneasy. "What do you mean?" "Nothing yet," I said. "You'll see soon enough." After we hung up, I felt the same warmth I used to feel before teaching a lesson I knew would change a student's life. Only this time, the lesson wasn't about history. It was about truth. The first weekend passed like a storm that didn't know when to quit. Jaden, Naomi, and Caleb came through the front door like a gust of wind, loud, restless, full of demands that didn't fit inside my quiet little house. By Sunday night, my living room looked like a toy store after a hurricane, crumbs everywhere. Juice spilled on the rug, a backpack dumped out in the hallway. At first, I told myself to breathe. Children make messes, that's what they do. But there was something else in the way they moved, something sharp in their tone, too old for their age. When I asked Jaden to take his shoes off, he said, "Mom doesn't care if we wear them inside." Naomi rolled her eyes when I told her to help set the table. Caleb looked up from his tablet and said, "Mom says you don't like kids." I didn't respond. I just kept cooking, the smell of cornbread and butter softening the edges of my thoughts. The words weren't really theirs. They were borrowed, echoes of Vanessa's voice traveling through small mouths. Still, hearing them hurt in ways I couldn't explain. At dinner, Jaden complained about the food. "It's not like what Mom makes." I smiled. "That's true," I said. "Your mama and I don't cook the same. Mine has history in it." He frowned. "History?" "Yes. Recipes passed down from people who didn't have much, but knew how to make something good out of it anyway. You'll learn." He didn't answer, but I saw the way his fork slowed down. Something about the word learn caught him off guard. That night, after the dishes were washed and the house had finally gone still, I stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching them sleep. 3 small bodies tangled in blankets, faces soft and unguarded. For the first time since they arrived, I saw what lay beneath all that noise and attitude: fear. They were too young to name it, but I could feel it. A fear of disappointing the wrong parent, a fear of never being enough. I closed the door quietly and sat in the living room, the clock ticking steady on the mantel. My red suitcase was still in the hallway where I'd left it, tags on, wheels clean. I ran my hand across the handle and whispered, "Not yet." The next morning, I woke early. The house smelled like rain and biscuits. I set the table for 4 and waited. Jaden came down first, rubbing his eyes. "Grandma, you're up early," he said. "I always am," I told him. "The world wakes before you do, baby. You just have to notice." Naomi followed, hair messy, dragging her blanket behind her. She looked around, confused by the smell of real food, and quiet. "Where's Mom?" she asked. "On her trip," I said. "But you've got me for now." Caleb climbed onto a chair and whispered, "Do we have to say grace here?" "Yes," I said softly. "We do." They all bowed their heads reluctantly, and I thanked the Lord for patience, for strength, and for second chances, not just theirs, but mine. By afternoon, things began to shift, barely noticeable but real. Naomi helped fold towels after watching me do it twice. Jaden put his shoes by the door without me asking. Caleb laughed, a real laugh, not the quick, nervous kind I'd heard before. It felt like the air itself was learning to breathe again. When I stepped onto the porch that evening, the cicadas were singing their summer song, and the sun had turned the sky to gold. Across the street, my neighbor Miss Ruth waved from her rocking chair. "Got some company, huh?" she called. "Sure do," I said. "Might be the start of something good." She laughed. "Or something big." I smiled back, but inside I felt that strange mix of both. Because deep down, I knew the truth. Love was coming back into this house, and so was trouble. By Monday morning, I had learned the rhythm of their chaos. Jaden stomped through breakfast like he was late for a meeting that didn't exist. Naomi argued about everything from cereal to clothes, and Caleb clung to his tablet as if it were oxygen. I didn't fight it. I just watched, quiet and patient. Years in a classroom had taught me that the best lessons start in silence. When Marcus called that afternoon, I answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mama," he said, his voice tired but polite. "Vanessa told me everything's running smooth?" "Smooth enough," I said. "The kids are adjusting." He exhaled. "Good. I know it's a lot to ask." I waited a beat. "Did she tell you I had plans?" He hesitated. "She mentioned you were thinking about traveling." "Thinking," I repeated softly. "Yes. That's all I ever get to do. Think." There was a pause long enough to hear his guilt settle. Then the office noise crept back into the call. Voices, papers, movement. The sound of a life too full for reflection. "I'll check in later, okay, Mama?" "Sure," I said. But after the line went dead, I stared at the phone for a long while. Marcus didn't mean harm. That was the hardest part. People rarely do. Harm often wears the face of normal, of duty, of family, of "you'll understand one day." But the truth was, I did understand. Vanessa had learned how to use that, the soft spots of a mother's heart, the guilt of a son too busy to look closely. By the end of the week, her control reached into my home like invisible strings. The children repeated her rules, her tone, her priorities. Naomi asked if I'd seen the housekeeper yet. When I told her I didn't have one, she blinked, genuinely confused. Jaden scrolled through his phone and muttered, "Mom says you shouldn't lift heavy things at your age." I smiled at that one, carrying a laundry basket out to the porch just to prove I could. But it wasn't just about pride. It was about ownership, of time, of respect, of identity. I was realizing that I had spent decades serving a world that expected women like me to give and give until nothing was left. I'd taught history, but I was only just beginning to see mine clearly. That night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat by the window watching the street lamps glow against the wet pavement. Savannah at night is beautiful in a heavy sort of way. Spanish moss hanging like secrets, the air humming with stories nobody tells out loud. I thought of my mother, who cleaned houses for 30 years and never once called in sick. She used to say, "Don't let anyone decide who you are, baby. They'll always choose small." Somewhere in the darkness, I whispered back, "I hear you now." The next morning, I made the children breakfast and told them they were going to earn their keep. We would clean, cook, learn, and talk. Jaden frowned. "Mom says you spoil us when we're here." I smiled. She was wrong. By noon, the house was buzzing with something new, resistance and curiosity mixing in equal parts. Naomi learned how to fold sheets properly. Caleb watered plants and named each one after superheroes. Jaden complained the most, but when he saw his siblings laughing, he gave in. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't have to. The real power was in what I didn't say. Late that evening, when the last dish was washed and the house smelled like lemon soap, I sat back in my chair and thought about Vanessa. For years, she'd used me like a servant she didn't pay, like a relic that existed to serve her comfort. But she didn't understand something very simple. Women like me come from a long line of quiet storms. We don't destroy, we cleanse. As the crickets began to sing, I made myself a note in the small journal I kept by the bed. Respect isn't given. It's taught. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next few days passed in a strange calm. The children began to settle into my rhythm without realizing it. Mornings started with breakfast and music, afternoons with reading or chores, evenings with quiet stories on the porch. But inside me, another rhythm was waking. Something old, something tired of being polite. One afternoon, while Caleb napped and the others colored at the kitchen table, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old photos from my classroom, faces of children long grown, bulletin boards covered in essays about freedom and courage. My favorite picture was from 1989, me standing between two students, smiling wide, chalk dust on my sleeve. I looked strong, alive. I tried to remember the last time I had felt that woman inside me. Back then, I used to walk into my classroom with purpose. Every lesson had a heartbeat. I believed knowledge could break chains, not just the ones history left behind, but the quiet ones we let people place on us every day. Somewhere between grading papers, paying bills, and being everyone's answer, that fire dimmed. I had let it. I heard Naomi's voice from the table. "Grandma, were you famous or something?" I smiled. "No, baby, just useful." She held up the photo. "You look like a boss." I laughed. Maybe I was. Jaden looked over his shoulder. "Mom says teachers don't make real money." "Your mama's not wrong," I said. "But you don't always get paid in money. Sometimes it's in peace. Sometimes it's in pride." He shrugged, pretending not to care, but I saw how long he stared at that photo before turning back to his coloring. Later that day, I sat outside while they played in the yard. The air was thick with the scent of magnolia and cut grass. I thought about my late husband, Leonard, how he used to call me his professor with fire. He believed in me even when I didn't. When he died, I poured all that belief into Marcus. But now, looking back, I realized I had forgotten to save a little for myself. The screen door creaked open behind me. Jaden stepped out, awkward and curious. "Grandma," he said, "how come you don't get mad when we mess up?" I looked at him and smiled. "Because anger doesn't teach, baby. It only scares." "And I'm not here to scare you." He nodded, a little embarrassed, then said, "Mom yells a lot." "I know," I said quietly. "She's loud because she's afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Losing control." He thought about that, kicked at the dirt, then went back inside. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt that ghost of my younger self standing beside me. The teacher, the dreamer, the woman who once believed she could change lives with patience alone. She whispered something I hadn't heard in decades. "You're still her. You just stopped using your voice." That night, I wrote another note in my journal. Being needed is not the same as being loved. The children were asleep early, the house peaceful in a way that felt almost holy. I looked around and saw signs of change, Naomi's drawing taped to the fridge, Jaden's shoes by the door, Caleb's toy car parked neatly on the rug. Tiny proofs that love can grow again when someone dares to plant it. But as I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa lit up the screen. "Hope the kids aren't driving you crazy. Miami's been amazing. You should see the view." A photo followed, her hand holding a drink, ocean behind her, another hand resting lightly on her knee. Not Marcus's. I stared at the image, not with shock, but with calm. The kind of calm that comes before thunder. Then I whispered to myself, I see you now. I didn't reply. I just closed the phone and let the night breathe around me. Somewhere inside, that quiet storm began to form. By the end of the second week, the children were different. It wasn't dramatic, no movie-style transformation, no tears or speeches. It was in the small things. The way Jaden paused before snapping back at me. The way Naomi started humming while folding towels. The way Caleb began asking questions instead of hiding behind a screen. They were beginning to feel safe, though none of us had said the word aloud. That Tuesday morning, I decided to test the waters. No screens until after dinner, I said while clearing the breakfast plates. We're going to learn how to cook something real. Jaden groaned. Grandma, cooking is boring. Only if you're afraid of burning something, I said. Naomi frowned. Mom says you shouldn't make us do chores. That's not how she does it. I looked at her gently. Then maybe she's missing out. They didn't like it, but curiosity won. Before long, the kitchen smelled of onions, peppers, and butter. I showed them how to season chicken, how to wait for oil to shimmer, how patience can taste like flavor if you give it time. Caleb stood on a chair beside me, holding a spoon too big for his hand. This is like science, he said proudly. Exactly, I told him. Cooking is history and science mixed together, just like life. Jaden laughed when the oil popped too high. You're not scared? Of what? A little heat? He shook his head. Mom freaks out if we make a mess. I handed him a towel. Then we'll clean it up. By the time the food was done, they were smiling. They didn't even notice I'd snuck lessons into every step. Patience, teamwork, consequence. We sat down together, and for the first time, no one complained about what was on the table. Jaden even asked for seconds. After lunch, while Naomi washed dishes, I stepped outside to water the plants. The sun hung low, golden against the old live oaks. Miss Ruth waved from across the street. Those grandbabies of yours sound happier, she called out. They're learning, I said. Or maybe you're reminding them, she answered. That evening, I found Naomi in the living room drawing pictures of us cooking. She'd labeled it Grandma's Kitchen Rules. When I told her it was beautiful, she blushed and said, Mom wouldn't like it. Does it make you happy? I asked. She nodded. Then that's enough. Later that night, as the children watched a movie, I sat on the porch with a cup of sweet tea and thought about rebellion. In school, I used to teach about revolutions, how they never started with armies, but with questions. These children were starting to question, not just me, but the world their mother had built around them. That realization filled me with equal parts pride and fear, because I knew Vanessa wouldn't take kindly to change, not from her children, and certainly not from me. Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote, Love is rebellion when someone wants you small. I tucked the notebook away just as Jaden came to the doorway. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course, baby, he hesitated. How come Mom always looks angry when Dad talks about you? I smiled, careful. Some people confuse strength with threat. Maybe she doesn't know the difference yet. He nodded slowly, trying to understand more than a 12-year-old should. Then he said, You're not scary. No, I said softly. I'm steady. After he went back to bed, I stared out at the dark street. The city hummed low and heavy, full of secrets that only night dared to keep. I could feel the change moving through my house like quiet thunder. The children were learning how to stand taller, and so was I. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was helping Naomi braid her hair before bed. The house smelled like soap and lavender, soft and clean. The phone buzzed on the table, and when I saw Marcus's name, my hands hesitated. He didn't call often unless something was wrong. Hey, Mama, he said, his voice tight with exhaustion. How are the kids behaving? They're doing fine, I told him, better than when they arrived. That's good, he said quickly, as if reading from a script. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the hum of his office behind him. Then his tone softened. Vanessa says you've been changing their routine a bit? I felt my heart settle into its patient rhythm. Routine? I said. I've just been giving them a little structure, meals at the table, chores, bedtime. She said they seem different, that Naomi sounds distant when she calls. Marcus, I said gently, have you considered that maybe your children are just happy? He didn't answer right away. I could almost hear the battle in his mind, the one between the woman who raised him and the woman he married. Mama, he finally said, Vanessa's worried you're trying to turn them against her. I laughed softly. If your wife feels threatened by clean dishes and bedtime stories, maybe that says more about her than me. He sighed, deep and weary. Please don't start. Start? I repeated. Son, I didn't start any of this. I've been finishing what she keeps breaking. That silence stretched wide. For a moment I almost apologized, but I stopped myself. Apologies had been my second language for too long. Marcus, I said, my voice calm, you know I love those children. I love you, but I won't be treated like help. I never said you were, he replied quickly. You didn't have to. The line went quiet again, and I could tell he was trying to decide which piece to protect, the easy one with his wife or the honest one with his mother. Mama, he said after a while, Vanessa's under a lot of stress. She just needs some time to… To what? I interrupted, though my voice stayed soft. To disrespect me in new ways? To use my kindness because it's easier than saying thank you? He didn't respond. The hum of the office faded, replaced by the sound of his breathing. I could almost see him running his hand over his face like he used to when he was a boy who didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. I'll talk to her, he said finally. No, I told him. You listen to her. Talking hasn't worked for a long time. When we hung up, I sat there for a while, staring at the quiet phone. Naomi looked up at me from the floor, her hair half braided. Was that Daddy? She asked. Yes, baby. Did he sound happy? I smiled sadly. He sounded like someone who forgot what happy feels like. She nodded, thoughtful beyond her years. Maybe you can teach him too. After she went to bed, I stepped onto the porch. The moon hung heavy over Savannah, and the air smelled of wet earth and jasmine. I thought about Marcus, my boy who once ran to me after every scraped knee, now too afraid to stand between the two women who shaped his life. I understood his fear. I had lived it once, the fear of losing peace, of being the villain for finally drawing a line. But fear and peace are tricky things. One can disguise itself as the other until you can't tell which is which. Inside, the house was quiet again. My journal sat open on the table, the page blank, waiting. I picked up my pen and wrote, "A mother's love should lift, not chain, even for her own son." The ink bled a little into the paper, spreading wider than I meant it to, like truth finally finding its way out. The next morning, the sun rose behind a veil of mist, turning the streets of Savannah silver. I woke before the children, the house still wrapped in the kind of quiet that feels like a promise. It had been years since mornings felt like mine. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, opening the small leather notebook I kept hidden in a drawer. It wasn't new. The pages were soft from years of folding and reopening. That notebook had traveled with me through heartbreak, funerals, bills, and birthdays. Lately, it had become my secret refuge. Every night after the children fell asleep, I wrote what I couldn't say aloud. Words like dignity, freedom, boundaries, justice, and reclaiming myself. That morning, I wrote only one line. When people use your kindness, they expect you to forget you have power. I took a long sip of coffee, feeling the truth of it settle inside me. When Jaden came down the stairs, his hair still wild from sleep, he looked surprised to see me dressed. "Where are you going, Grandma?" "Out for a walk," I said. "I like to see the city before it wakes." "Can we come?" Naomi asked from behind him. I smiled. Of course. We walked through the neighborhood, past the tall oaks and their hanging moss, past the bakery that smelled of cinnamon rolls. Naomi slipped her hand into mine. Jaden walked ahead, pretending he didn't care, though every few minutes he turned back to make sure I was still there. "Grandma," Caleb said, his small voice breaking the quiet, "what does free mean?" The question stopped me mid-step. I knelt beside him. "Free means you can choose who you want to be," I said. It means you don't live afraid of someone else's anger. He nodded, though I knew he didn't fully understand. But one day, he would. When we returned home, I found a message from Vanessa waiting on my phone. Checking in. Make sure the kids are staying in line. They can be a handful. There was no thank you, no warmth, just expectation. I didn't reply. Instead, I decided to use her words as fuel. The children needed lessons, not in obedience, but in truth. That afternoon, I gathered them in the living room and pulled out an old map from my teaching days. Today, I said, we're learning something special. History you won't find in your school books. I told them about Harriet Tubman, about her courage, about how freedom had always come at a cost. I showed them the paths she carved through the South, the lives she saved. Naomi leaned forward, her eyes wide. Was she scared? She asked. Of course, I said. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about walking anyway. By the end of the lesson, the room felt lighter. Jaden said, I didn't know we came from people that strong. You do, I said. You come from me. Later that evening, when the kids were watching a movie, I went to my bedroom and opened the closet. My red suitcase sat on the top shelf, waiting. I took it down, brushed off the dust, and unzipped it. Inside were my travel guides, still crisp, still ready. I ran my hand over the map again. Charleston, St. Augustine, D.C. I whispered, not yet, but soon. As I closed the suitcase, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about travel anymore. It was about movement, refusing to stay still in someone else's definition of my life. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook again. Freedom starts as a thought whispered to yourself. Then one day, it grows loud enough for the world to hear. I looked out the window, the Spanish moss swaying under the streetlights. Somewhere far away, the waves of Tybee Island were rolling against the shore. I could almost hear them calling my name. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt ready. The weekend brought a strange quiet to my house, the kind that hums with stories you haven't heard yet. The children were playing in the yard, sunlight slipping through the oak branches, while I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea. My phone buzzed, flashing Vanessa's name across the screen. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring, but something inside me wanted to know exactly what paradise looked like through her eyes. Hello, I said. Her voice came through bright and careless. Just checking in. The kids aren't driving you crazy yet, are they? They're fine, I said evenly. Learning manners, too. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't reach her soul. Well, don't get too strict, Loretta. I don't want them coming home and thinking we run a boot camp. I smiled to myself. Don't worry. We're running something better, a home. She didn't catch the meaning. Anyway, Miami's been amazing. The hotel's right on the beach. We had dinner at this place last night. Ocean view, live jazz, the whole thing. You'd love it here. I bet I would, I said. Is Marcus with you? Silence. Just the crash of waves on her end of the call. Then she cleared her throat. He's busy with work. You know how he is. Anyway, I'll send you pictures later. The call ended, but the quiet it left behind was louder than the laughter. I turned my phone over and stared at the blank screen, my reflection staring back, not angry, not surprised, just awake. I knew what it meant when someone's story had too many missing details. I'd taught enough history to recognize a rewrite when I saw one. That afternoon, after the children finished lunch, I asked Jaden if he could help me tidy up. He groaned, but he followed. When he set his phone on the counter, a message flashed across the screen before fading. I caught just enough to see the name Vanessa, followed by a heart emoji and the words, "Can't wait to see you again, baby." It wasn't my place to pry. Not yet. But it confirmed what I'd already felt in my bones. Vanessa's paradise wasn't a family trip or a work retreat. It was an escape. As I wiped the counter, Jaden said, "Mom said she might bring us gifts." "I'm sure she will," I replied softly. "Do you think she misses us?" I met his eyes. "I think she's missing something, baby. But I don't know if it's you." He didn't understand, but part of him felt it. Children always feel what adults try to hide. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat by the window scrolling through Vanessa's social media. Photos of her in white linen dresses, cocktails in hand, laughter too bright to be honest. One image stopped me. A man's reflection in her sunglasses, his hand resting lightly on her knee. I closed the app. I didn't need proof to know what I already knew. Betrayal has a rhythm, and hers had been playing for years. Instead of anger, I felt something steadier. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was the same feeling I'd had every time one of my students tried to cheat on a test, that quiet certainty that truth always catches up. I took out my notebook and wrote, "You can lie about where you are, but your reflection always tells the truth." The next morning, I printed a few of those pictures and tucked them into an envelope. Not for confrontation, not yet, just for safekeeping. A seed planted in case the day came when the truth needed proof. As the children ate breakfast, I watched them, how Naomi's curls bounced when she laughed, how Caleb lined up his cereal by color, how Jaden had started saying thank you without being reminded. Vanessa was in paradise, yes. But the real miracle was happening here, in this small house with worn floors and open hearts. And deep down, I began to wonder if her paradise might just turn out to be her downfall. The next week arrived like a whisper, gentle but full of purpose. The air in Savannah felt lighter somehow, though summer heat still clung to the porch rails and the moss dripped from the trees like old secrets. I could feel something shifting, not around me, but inside me. Each morning, I woke before the sun, brewed my coffee, and sat at the kitchen table watching the light crawl slowly across the floorboards. The house that once echoed with chaos now breathed in rhythm with me. The children had changed, not into saints, but into something far better. Curious, kind, present. Jaden started helping Caleb tie his shoes. Naomi brushed her hair and set the table without being told. Even the way they spoke to one another softened. There was laughter at breakfast now. Not forced, not perfect, just real. And I realized that I wasn't just raising them for Vanessa's return. I was re-raising them for the world. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, I gathered them around the table. "Today," I said, "we're going to learn about courage." Naomi looked up from her notebook. "Like soldiers?" "Sometimes," I said. "But most courage doesn't happen on battlefields. It happens right here." I tapped my chest. "It's what you do when no one claps for you." Jaden frowned. "Like what you're doing now?" I smiled. "Maybe." We talked for hours, weaving history and heart together. I told them stories about Ruby Bridges and Rosa Parks, about quiet people who changed loud worlds. Caleb asked if they were scared. "Always," I said. But they kept walking. When the rain stopped, Naomi helped me hang laundry on the porch. She watched the wet sky, thoughtful. "Grandma," she said, "how come Mom doesn't like when we talk about you?" My hands froze for a second. Maybe she doesn't understand me yet. "She says you're stubborn." I smiled. "That's another word for steady." Naomi nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then she said something that almost broke me. "I hope I'm steady too." That night, after they went to bed, I opened my notebook again. But instead of writing about anger or plans, I wrote gratitude. Not for Vanessa, not for the pain, but for this strange, unexpected chance to build something whole again. Then I took out the envelope of photos I'd printed and stared at them under the lamplight. The woman smiling in those images, drink in hand, eyes half closed in careless joy, looked powerful, but hollow. I didn't hate her. In some twisted way, I pitied her. She was too busy performing happiness to ever find peace. I put the photos away. Proof could wait. What mattered now was purpose. When Marcus called later that week, he sounded different, quieter, almost nervous. "Mama," he said, "the kids seem good, happier. What are you doing over there?" "Listening," I told him. "Something you might try." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from him in years. "You always find a way to teach, don't you?" "It's who I am," I said. I tried to retire from that once, but it didn't take. After we hung up, I sat on the porch in the dark, the air heavy with the smell of magnolia. For the first time since Vanessa's call, I felt still, not trapped, not waiting, just still. I understood something that had taken me nearly 70 years to learn. Peace doesn't come when people stop hurting you. It comes when you stop letting them. Before bed, I wrote one more line in my notebook. Strength isn't loud. It's steady hands folding laundry when you'd rather break dishes. And that night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, I knew the real turning point had already happened. Not when Vanessa left, not when the truth started to reveal itself, but when I decided I would no longer live small in my own story. It was a Thursday afternoon when the peace broke. The kids were in the backyard, chasing bubbles under the slow Savannah sun, and I was baking cornbread for dinner. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet, just the way my mother used to make it. For once, everything felt easy, no shouting, no tension, no tightness in my chest. I remember thinking, this is what a home is supposed to feel like. Then the sound of tires on gravel pulled me out of the moment. I looked through the kitchen window and saw it, that white SUV, the one that always looked out of place in front of my old brick house. She was home. Vanessa stepped out of the car wearing sunglasses big enough to hide half her face, her skin golden from a sun that had nothing to do with hard work. She didn't knock. She never did. She just opened my front door and walked in like it still belonged to her. "Well," she said, setting down her designer purse, "looks like everyone's still alive." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and smiled politely. "You're back early." She shrugged. "Flights were cheaper on Thursdays. I figured you wouldn't mind." From the backyard, I heard Caleb's laughter, free, loud, unguarded. Vanessa frowned at the sound. "Are they outside?" "Yes," I said. "Getting some air." She raised an eyebrow. "Air? They're going to get sunburned." "They're wearing sunscreen," I said simply, turning back to the oven. "I made cornbread if you're hungry." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked through the house slowly, her heels clicking against the wood floor. Her eyes scanned everything: the folded laundry on the couch, the drawings taped to the fridge, the open books on the table. Her lips tightened as if she were walking through someone else's home. When she reached the back door, she froze. The children were running barefoot through the grass, Naomi chasing Caleb, Jaden helping him blow bubbles that shimmered like tiny worlds. They were laughing together, a sound she didn't recognize. "What on earth have you been doing to them?" she asked without turning around. "Letting them be children," I said. Her shoulders stiffened. "You've made them soft. They used to listen to me." "They still listen," I said. "They just don't fear." She spun around, finally meeting my eyes. "You think you know better than me?" I held her stare. "No," I said softly. "I just stopped pretending you do." The words hung in the air like heat. Outside, the laughter had gone quiet. The children stood near the porch steps, sensing what was happening. Naomi whispered, "Mom?" Vanessa's voice softened instantly. "Hey, sweetheart. Did you miss me?" Naomi nodded, but her smile was small, uncertain. Jaden kept his distance, his arm still around Caleb's shoulder. Vanessa looked back at me. "See what you've done? You've turned them against me." "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you left them behind." She glared at me, but for a second, something flickered behind her eyes. Not anger, not pride, but fear. Marcus had always told me Vanessa hated silence more than anything. She filled it with noise, with spending, with drama. But now, in this still house that smelled of cornbread and love, silence was all there was, and she couldn't stand it. She grabbed her purse and said, "We'll be leaving tonight." I stepped forward, calm as a teacher facing a student who hadn't studied. "You won't," I said. "The children deserve to rest." "You can't tell me what to do," she snapped. "No," I said. "But I can tell you what won't happen under my roof." She opened her mouth, ready to fight, but the children appeared behind her, 3 small witnesses to every truth she'd tried to hide. Naomi reached for my hand. Jaden stood tall beside her. Caleb leaned against my leg. Vanessa froze. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure of her own place. "Dinner's ready," I said softly. "You're welcome to join us." Her silence was answer enough. As the sun sank behind the trees, I watched her walk through my house like someone who'd lost their way in a place they used to own. And for the first time, I realized the lesson wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure, letting the truth stand in the light long enough for everyone to see what it really was. The next morning felt different. The air in Savannah had that heavy stillness that comes after a storm, even though the sky was perfectly clear. The house seemed to breathe on its own, calm and sure, as if it already knew who belonged inside it and who didn't. Vanessa barely slept. I heard her pacing the guest room long after midnight, doors opening and closing, drawers sliding, as if she were searching for something she'd misplaced. Maybe she was. When she finally came into the kitchen, I was already there, coffee brewed, breakfast sizzling on the stove. "Morning," I said, my tone steady. She glanced at the table. Biscuits, eggs, fruit. Her eyes caught on the folded napkins, the neatly set plates. It wasn't extravagance. It was order, discipline, love made visible. "You didn't have to cook," she said flatly. "I know," I said. "I wanted to." Naomi and Caleb shuffled in, sleepy but smiling. "Morning, Grandma," Naomi said, kissing my cheek. Caleb climbed onto his chair without a word. Jaden came last, his head high, his shoulders calm. Vanessa watched all three of them move through the room like they'd been living there forever. She tried to break the spell. "Kids, get your things packed. We're heading home after breakfast." No one moved. "Did you hear me?" she repeated, her voice sharper now. Naomi looked up. "But Grandma said we were going to the farmer's market today." "I said you could," I corrected gently. "But you don't have to." Vanessa stared at me, her jaw tight. "You filled their heads with nonsense." I took a sip of coffee. "Respect isn't nonsense." Jaden finally spoke. "Mom, we like it here. We're learning stuff." "Stuff?" she echoed, a bitter laugh slipping out. "Loretta, what exactly are you teaching them?" "The same things I taught your husband once, that kindness doesn't mean weakness, that love has limits, that home is earned." For a moment, her mask cracked. Just a flicker of uncertainty, gone as quickly as it came. She turned to Jaden. "Get in the car." "No," he said quietly. The word hit the room like thunder. Naomi gasped. Caleb froze, mid-bite. Even I felt my breath catch. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Excuse me?" Jaden met her eyes, not with defiance, but with calm. I said, "No, we're staying for lunch." She opened her mouth to yell, but something in his tone stopped her. He wasn't rebelling. He was deciding. "You've let her turn you against me," she said, her voice trembling. Naomi spoke then, soft but firm. "Grandma didn't turn us. She listens." Silence. Only the ticking clock filled the space between us. I rose from my chair slowly. "Vanessa," I said, "you can stay for breakfast if you'd like, but yelling won't get you anywhere in this house." Her eyes flicked between me and the children. "You think you've won?" "This isn't a contest," I said. "It's a choice." For a long time she stood there, torn between pride and loss. Finally, she grabbed her purse and said, "Fine, I'll be in the car." She left without another word. The door slammed, but the sound didn't shake me. It only echoed through the walls and disappeared, leaving something peaceful in its place. Naomi whispered, "Is she mad?" "Yes," I said, "but she'll survive it." "We all do." Jaden looked out the window, watching the car sit idle in the driveway. "She doesn't like it here." "That's because the truth lives here now," I said quietly. He nodded, understanding more than I expected. After breakfast, we walked to the market just as we'd planned. The sky was wide and blue, the streets alive with vendors and music. Naomi held my hand, Caleb carried the basket, Jaden walked beside me, tall, steady, protective in that gentle way boys learn from men they admire. When we came back, the car was gone. Vanessa hadn't said goodbye. I stood on the porch, the sun warm on my face, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not triumph, but freedom. Inside, the clock ticked softly, the air smelled like cinnamon, and the house seemed to hum with a new truth. We didn't need her chaos anymore. And maybe, just maybe, neither did Marcus. Vanessa returned that evening, her perfume hitting the air before her footsteps reached the kitchen. I didn't look up right away. I was setting the table, the children helping in quiet rhythm. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the walls in gold and rose. It was a beautiful hour, the kind that makes you forget you're about to face a storm. She stood in the doorway, sunglasses still on, even though the light was fading. "So," she said, her voice sharp, "everyone's just pretending nothing happened?" Jaden looked at me, unsure. I smiled. "Dinner's almost ready. Wash your hands." Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. "Of course. Back to Grandma's rules." Naomi whispered, "Mom, please." But Vanessa cut her off. "Don't you please me. You've been here 2 weeks and suddenly you think you're better than your own mother?" I set down the serving spoon carefully, the metal clicking against the counter. "Vanessa," I said, my voice soft but steady, "we don't talk to children like that here." She turned toward me, lips pressed tight. "You think you can tell me how to talk to my kids?" "I can tell you how to talk in my house," I said. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. "You've been poisoning them against me." "No," I said quietly. "You've just been gone long enough for them to remember what love feels like." Her face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said, meeting her eyes. "I know the sound of fear when it gets dressed up as control. I know the difference between power and respect." For a moment, she froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She wasn't used to my calm. Calm was a language she couldn't argue with. The children stood near the table, motionless, watching. I hated that they had to see this, but sometimes truth demands witnesses. Finally, she spoke. "Marcus will hear about this." "I hope he does," I said. "He needs to." She glared at me, then looked at the children. "Get your things. We're leaving." Jaden straightened his shoulders. "Mom, we're eating dinner." Her eyes widened at his tone, not defiant, but certain. "Excuse me?" "We're eating," he said again. "Then we'll pack." Something in her broke then. She stepped back, her breath uneven. "You don't get to decide when we leave." I took a slow breath and wiped my hands on the towel. "Sit down, Vanessa." She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "What?" "Sit," I said again. "You've spent years running from stillness. Maybe it's time you tried it." Her mouth opened to argue, but instead she lowered herself into a chair, maybe out of confusion, maybe out of exhaustion. I served her a plate, the same as everyone else's. Cornbread, collard greens, baked chicken. She stared at it like it might burn her. Jaden passed her the butter without a word. Naomi poured her water. Caleb whispered a prayer before eating. The table was quiet except for the sound of forks against plates and the hum of cicadas through the open window. When the meal was done, Vanessa pushed her plate away. "You think this little act fixes anything?" "No," I said. "It wasn't an act. It was a beginning." She stood abruptly. "You've made a mistake thinking you can control my family." I rose slowly to meet her gaze. "I'm not controlling anything. I'm protecting what's left of it." The room went silent again. Outside, a breeze swept through the trees, and for a second, it felt like the whole house was listening. Vanessa's hand trembled as she grabbed her purse. She looked at the children, her face tight, her eyes glassy. "We're leaving tomorrow," she said, and walked out before anyone could answer. The door closed behind her, but her perfume lingered, heavy and uncertain. Naomi whispered, "Is she mad at us?" I placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's mad at the truth, baby. But the truth doesn't mind." That night, as I tucked them into bed, I felt the weight of what had just begun. There was no yelling, no name-calling, no grand explosion, just silence, thick and powerful, the kind that changes everything. The next morning was brighter than it had any right to be. The sky over Savannah was clear, the air heavy with the sweetness of magnolia, and yet the house felt tight with anticipation. I had barely finished setting the table for breakfast when I heard the deep hum of an engine outside. Through the front window, I saw it, Marcus's car pulling into the driveway. He stepped out still in his work clothes, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, his face worn but alert. Behind him, the sunlight hit the gray strands at his temples, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who ran barefoot through my yard with scraped knees and big dreams. The screen door creaked as he walked in. "Hey, Mama," he said, voice softer than I expected. "Hey, baby," I answered, wiping my hands on a towel. "You drove all the way down without calling?" He gave a tired smile. "Vanessa said things got tense." I nodded. That's one way to put it. He looked around the room, the folded laundry, the kids' drawings on the fridge, the smell of butter and bread in the air. "It looks peaceful here," he said quietly. "It is," I replied. "That's the problem." From the hallway, Naomi appeared first, still in her pajamas. "Daddy," she cried, running to him. Caleb followed, and Jaden walked behind, slower, watching. Marcus knelt down, hugging all three of them at once. For a moment, everything looked right. Then Vanessa's footsteps echoed down the hall. She entered like someone stepping onto a stage she no longer controlled. "Finally," she said, her voice brittle. "Maybe you can talk some sense into your mother." Marcus straightened slowly. "Sense about what?" "About boundaries," she snapped. "About how she's been undermining me for weeks." Jaden frowned. "She hasn't." "Not now," Marcus said gently, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. But Jaden didn't back down. "She's been nice, Dad. She listens to us. We're happy here." Vanessa turned to Marcus. "See? She's turned them against me." I stood still, calm as water. "I didn't turn anyone, Vanessa. I just gave them a place where they could breathe." Marcus rubbed the bridge of his nose, that old habit from childhood when the world felt too heavy. "Can we all sit down?" We did. The children sat quietly, their eyes darting between us. Vanessa's jaw stayed tight. But Marcus looked at me, not with accusation, but with confusion, the kind that comes from seeing something you don't recognize anymore. "Mama," he said carefully, "did you really tell her she's not in charge here?" "I told her respect doesn't depend on who's in charge," I said. "It depends on who remembers how to care." He sighed, leaning back. "You know how she gets." "Yes," I said. "And now you do too." Vanessa stood, anger spilling over. "I'm done with this. I came here for help, not judgment. If you can't see how she manipulates everyone—" "Enough," Marcus said, his voice firm for the first time. It startled even her. "You wanted me to see, Vanessa, so I'm seeing. And what I see is 3 kids who are calmer than I've seen in years. A house that feels like a home. And a mother who's been disrespected long enough." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side of truth," he said quietly. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air seemed to hum with all the words we hadn't said over the years. Then Caleb broke the silence with a soft, practical question. "Daddy, can we still go to the park after breakfast?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah, buddy, we can." Vanessa looked at him, disbelief turning to something smaller, fear, maybe, or the first tremor of realization. Without another word, she turned and left the room. The sound of the front door closing was gentle this time, almost like surrender. Marcus sank into his chair. "Mama," he said, "I didn't see it before. I kept thinking you were being hard on her." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You didn't want to believe you'd married someone who could hurt people quietly. I understand. I used to do the same. Let silence protect what needed to be faced." He nodded slowly. "What do we do now?" "We start telling the truth," I said. "Everywhere it hurts." The children sat between us, still, watching, not afraid anymore. Outside, the cicadas began to sing again, the world carrying on, steady and sure. And for the first time in years, my son and I sat at the same table, not as mother and child, but as two people finally ready to see each other clearly. That night, the house was heavy with quiet again, but not the peaceful kind. It was the quiet that comes when truth starts taking up too much space to ignore. Marcus had tucked the kids into bed and gone for a walk around the block to clear his head. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping an already clean counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant song of crickets. When I heard the knock on the back door, I didn't need to look. I knew it was her. Vanessa stepped inside, her makeup washed away, her eyes red around the edges. She didn't look like the woman who had strutted through my doorway weeks ago. She looked smaller, stripped of her armor. Still, her tone carried that old edge. "You happy now?" I turned off the sink. "Happy about what?" "You've turned my husband against me, my kids. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you?" I shook my head. "No, Vanessa. I've been waiting for respect." She scoffed. "Respect? You don't know what it's like raising kids, keeping a marriage together?" I interrupted her softly. "You're right. I only raised a son alone, paid bills I couldn't afford, and buried a man I loved. What could I possibly know?" Her lips trembled, but she covered it with anger. "You always think you're so righteous." "I just think I'm done," I said. "Done what?" "Done being used." The words landed between us like thunder. I watched them sink in, slow and deep. She folded her arms, defensive again. "You think you can just walk away from your own family?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "But I can stop letting family walk all over me." She looked away then, staring at the floor. "Marcus won't forgive me." "Maybe not today," I said. "But forgiveness isn't the same as permission." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You don't understand how hard it is. He doesn't see me. I do everything, and it's never enough." For a moment her pain cracked through the pride, and I saw something human, a woman terrified of being invisible. "I believe you," I said gently, "but hurting other people doesn't make you seen. It just makes you alone." She sat down at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. "I don't know how to fix any of this." I poured her a glass of water and set it in front of her. "Start with honesty," I said. "That's how everything good begins." She took a small sip, her gaze flicking toward me. "Do you hate me?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I said finally. "I pity you. You've built your whole life trying to look powerful instead of being whole." She stared at the table, silent. Then I added, "And I forgive you. But that doesn't mean you get to keep doing this." Her eyes met mine, angry, afraid, uncertain. "So that's it?" "That's the line," I said. "I'll always be kind. But I'll never be quiet again." The back door creaked open, and Marcus stepped in, surprised to see us. He looked from her to me, the air still charged between us. "Everything okay?" Vanessa stood. "We're done talking," she said quickly, brushing past him. When she was gone, Marcus turned to me. "Mama," I took a slow breath. "You saw what's left of your marriage. You have to decide if you're going to rebuild or keep pretending." He nodded, the weight of truth settling on his shoulders. "You think there's hope?" "There's always hope," I said, "but hope doesn't mean staying the same." He reached out and took my hand, his grip strong, his eyes tired. "I should have listened to you sooner." "No," I said softly. "You had to see it yourself." That's how lessons work. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, slow and low. I looked out the window toward the dark horizon and whispered to myself, "That's the sound of something ending right." For the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace finding its way home. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet rearrangements. The air in the house had changed again, lighter, yet heavier in meaning. Vanessa stayed in the guest room, mostly behind a closed door. Marcus split his time between her and the children, moving like a man who suddenly realized he'd been living two lives and had to choose which one to keep. I didn't interfere. I cooked, cleaned, listened when the children talked, and waited for what I knew was coming. Truth has a way of taking its time, but once it arrives, It doesn't leave without collecting what it's owed. On Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of shouting outside. Vanessa's voice, sharp, breaking, carried through the open window. I stepped onto the porch and saw them in the driveway. She stood beside her car, her hair wild from the wind, while Marcus faced her with the same quiet I'd spent years teaching him. "You're just going to throw everything away?" she yelled. "Over her?" Marcus shook his head. "Over peace," he said. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "She's manipulating you. You can't even see it." He looked at her, calm but steady. "Mama didn't manipulate anyone." "You did. And you didn't even need to lie to do it. You just kept taking until there was nothing left to give." She went silent, stunned by the stillness in his voice. "So what now?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know what can't keep happening." When he turned toward the house, he saw me standing there. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw the same boy who used to come home after a fight at school, looking for reassurance that he'd done the right thing. I gave him a small nod. He didn't need my words this time. Vanessa got into the car, slammed the door, and sat there for a long moment before driving off. The sound of the tires fading down the road felt like the closing of a chapter that had stayed open too long. Inside, Naomi was crying softly in the hallway. I knelt down beside her. "It's okay, baby," I said. Change always sounds loud at first. "Is she gone?" Naomi asked. "For now," I said. "But that's not the same as forever." Jaden appeared next, standing tall, his face set in that same quiet determination that ran in our bloodline. "Grandma, did Dad do the right thing?" I took his hand. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel right at all. But yes, he did. By evening, the house was still again. Marcus sat on the porch watching the sun dip low over the live oaks. I joined him, handing him a glass of sweet tea. "She'll fight me on this," he said softly. "I know," I replied. "But the fight isn't the worst part. The pretending was." He nodded, staring at the horizon. "You think the kids will be okay?" "They will," I said. "They've seen what love looks like when it's honest. That's more than most people ever get." He exhaled, heavy but relieved. "Mama, I used to think you were just stubborn." "I am," I said with a small laugh. "But stubbornness kept me alive. It's also what's going to save you now." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. Fireflies blinked in the yard, the nightbirds started their songs, and for once, I didn't feel like time was slipping through my hands. Before heading inside, Marcus said, "I don't know what comes next." "Then you start small," I told him. "You start by resting." Later, after the house had gone quiet, I opened my journal and wrote, "The truth doesn't fix everything. It just clears the fog so you can finally see where to walk." I closed it, turned off the lamp, and lay in bed listening to the distant thunder over the river. It didn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounded like a drum, steady and sure, reminding me that every ending carries its own rhythm of rebirth. A week after Vanessa left, the air in Savannah finally broke open with rain. It poured for hours, washing the streets clean, filling the gutters, and drumming softly against my roof. I stood on the porch and watched the water fall through the moss-covered branches, feeling something in me loosen with every drop. Inside, the house felt new. It wasn't quieter. Laughter had taken up permanent residence here, but it was lighter, as if the walls themselves could breathe again. The children had found their rhythm, Naomi humming while setting the table, Caleb chasing his toy cars across the hallway, Jaden helping me fix a squeaky cabinet door. And Marcus, my boy, was different too. He moved slower now, spoke softer, listened more. Every morning, he sat with me on the porch before heading into town to meet with the lawyer. The first few days, neither of us said much. Just sat, watched the rain, and shared silence like communion. That Friday, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a printed form and a pen. "You'll need to sign this," he said. "It's for the custody arrangement. The kids will be living with me for now." I looked up at him. "And me?" He smiled gently. "Mama, you already know the answer to that." I signed without another word. Later, when the rain stopped, we took the children to the park. The ground was still damp, the air cool. Naomi climbed the swings, her laughter slicing through the afternoon. Caleb chased butterflies near the bushes, his shoes soaked through. Jaden sat beside me on the bench, his hands resting on his knees. "You think Mom's okay?" he asked. "She's finding her way," I said. "Sometimes the road to truth takes people through a storm or two." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "I'm glad we came here." "So am I, baby," I said. "You all reminded me who I was." That night, after everyone went to bed, I pulled out my suitcase. That same red one I'd packed months ago and never used. I set it on the bed and zipped it open. The maps and brochures were still inside, but they didn't call to me the same way anymore. I realized that the trip I'd been dreaming of had already happened, right here in this house. I hadn't traveled to Charleston or D.C., but I'd crossed a different kind of distance, one between silence and truth, fear and freedom. Still, the suitcase wasn't going back into the closet. I left it by the door, not as a symbol, not as defiance, just as a reminder that life still had miles left for me. The next morning, I made breakfast while the sunlight filtered through the kitchen window. Marcus came in, holding his coffee. "You thinking of going somewhere?" he asked, nodding toward the suitcase. "Someday," I said, "not today. Today, I'm right where I need to be." He smiled, kissed my forehead and said, "You know, Mama, I used to think peace was quiet. Now I think it sounds like your kitchen." I laughed softly. "Then I've been making peace all my life." The children came running in, hungry and loud, filling the room with the kind of noise that felt like healing. We sat together, eating pancakes and talking about small things. Caleb's dream about flying, Naomi's plan to start a garden, Jaden's idea to paint the fence bright yellow. And as I listened, I thought, this is what survival sounds like. Not triumph, not revenge, just the steady hum of a family learning how to be whole again. After breakfast, I stepped outside and breathed in the clean air. The streets glistened, the world smelled of rain and renewal, and I felt something simple but profound, gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the growth it forced out of me. I didn't need anyone's permission to live anymore. I'd earned my freedom quietly, one truth at a time. And though I wasn't leaving yet, I knew that when I finally did, I wouldn't be running away. I'd be walking forward. 2 months passed before we saw her again. By then, the air had shifted, not just in Savannah, but inside all of us. Marcus was finding his footing as a single father. The children laughed louder, slept through the night, and carried peace in their small shoulders as if they'd been born knowing how to hold it. As for me, I had finally started my little dream, a reading club for neighborhood kids in the church basement. I called it the Porch Project, because that's where everything had begun, with stories, patience, and sunlight. The day Vanessa showed up, the sky was gray but calm. We were at the shore, Tybee Island, watching the waves roll in. The children were skipping shells across the surface of the water, their laughter blending with the wind. I was packing our picnic leftovers when I saw her standing by the pier, arms crossed, her hair pulled back tight, the wind catching her dress. Marcus noticed her too. "Mama," he said softly, "maybe it's time." She walked toward us slowly, her heels sinking into the sand. The children froze when they saw her. Caleb hid behind my leg. Naomi held Jaden's hand. Vanessa stopped a few steps away. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was smaller, thinner, like a thread that could snap with one more tug. Marcus nodded. "You came to the right place." She looked at me then, and for the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, only weariness. "I've been trying to get clean," she said quietly. "Not from drugs or drinking, from the lying, from pretending." I said nothing. Truth doesn't need applause. "I hurt people," she continued. "You, Marcus, the kids. I kept thinking I was proving something, but I was just scared." Naomi stepped closer, cautious. "Scared of what, Mama?" Vanessa swallowed hard. "Of not being enough." That sentence cracked something open. Even the ocean seemed to quiet for it. Marcus nodded slowly. "We all get scared," he said, "but fear doesn't have to lead everything." Vanessa's gaze shifted back to me. "Loretta, I don't expect forgiveness." I met her eyes. "Good," I said softly. "Because forgiveness isn't something you demand. It's something you earn." She nodded. "I'm trying." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The children looked between us, unsure of what to do with a piece that still had sharp edges. Then Naomi, with her quiet courage, reached out and took her mother's hand. Caleb followed. Jaden hesitated, then stepped forward too. Vanessa's shoulders trembled as she pulled them close. "I missed you," she whispered. Marcus placed a hand on her back, not romantic, not resigned, but human. "We all missed something," he said. "Maybe this is how we start finding it again." I turned toward the water, letting the wind carry my thoughts. There was no neat ending here, no perfect closure, just truth, messy and alive, finally breathing in the open air. Vanessa stayed with us until the sun began to dip below the horizon. Before she left, she turned to me once more. "You taught them more in 2 months than I managed in years," she said. "I understand now why they love you so much." "They love you too," I told her. "They just needed to remember how." She nodded, her eyes glistening. Then she walked back toward the parking lot, her footsteps fading into the sound of the tide. As the sky turned orange, Marcus exhaled deeply beside me. "I didn't think she'd come." "People always come back to the truth," I said. "The question is whether they stay." He smiled faintly. "And you? You still planning that road trip?" I looked out over the ocean, the waves licking the shore like soft applause. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I already took it." When we packed up to leave, Naomi slipped her small hand into mine. "Grandma, are we happy now?" I smiled, watching the horizon fade into twilight. "We're learning how to be," I said. "And that's even better." Autumn came to Savannah with soft winds and golden afternoons. The cicadas quieted, the trees began to let go of their leaves, and the air carried that smell of sweet decay that feels like both an ending and a beginning. I loved this time of year. It made everything honest. Nothing pretended to last forever. The house, once a place of exhaustion and noise, had turned into something sacred. Every morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and the children filled the space with music, laughter, and life. Naomi started painting. Her drawings now covered the fridge like windows into her heart. Jaden was taller, calmer, his voice deeper when he said grace at dinner. Caleb had learned to read, sitting in my lap each night sounding out words as if unlocking secret doors. Marcus was thriving too. He got a promotion at the community center, started coaching youth basketball, and even joined us for Sunday service again, something he hadn't done in years. There was a steadiness about him now, a quiet he'd earned. And me? I had found peace in motion again. My little reading group had grown into a community project, teaching neighborhood kids not just how to read, but how to tell their own stories. Every Saturday, I opened my porch to anyone who needed a place to sit, to talk, to remember that they mattered. I called it the Porch Project still, but the truth was it had become more than a name. It was the home I'd always wanted, a space built from patience, love, and boundaries. One afternoon, Naomi asked if we could drive to Tybee Island again. The ocean had become our family's place of renewal. We packed sandwiches, sweet tea, and a blanket. And when we reached the shore, the sky was all gold and silver, the horizon wide and forgiving. While the children ran toward the waves, Marcus sat beside me. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd said no that day she called?" he asked. I smiled. Every day, but then I remember. Saying yes was how I found my voice again. He looked at me thoughtfully. "You didn't just teach the kids, Mama. You taught all of us." I turned toward the water, watching Naomi chase Caleb along the tide, their laughter caught by the wind. "That's the thing about lessons," I said. "The good ones don't end when the bell rings." He chuckled. "You really can't stop being a teacher, can you?" "No," I said. "It's who I am. And I'm proud of it." For a while we sat in silence, the waves brushing against the shore, the smell of salt and sunlight in the air. Then Marcus asked, "Do you forgive her?" I thought about Vanessa, where she might be, what she might be learning. "Forgiveness isn't something I hold in my hands," I said. "It's something I leave open. When she's ready to meet me there, she will." As the sun began to dip low, I stood and walked toward the water. The cool tide kissed my feet, and I felt it, that deep, grounded stillness that had eluded me for most of my life. Freedom, but not the kind I used to dream of on a map. The kind you build quietly, moment by moment, choice by choice. I turned back to the shore, to my family, to the life that had remade itself from the ashes of silence. Somewhere deep inside I whispered, "This is what dignity looks like." And when Naomi called out, "Grandma, come run with us," I laughed, kicked off my shoes, and ran toward the waves. The children's laughter rose like music behind me, and for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't holding anything back. Because sometimes freedom isn't leaving. It's staying and changing the story from within. When I look back now, that phone call feels like a lifetime ago. The one where she said, "You're free anyway." I didn't know it then, but those 3 careless words were the beginning of everything that saved me. They forced me to ask what freedom really meant, and to see that sometimes the only way to be free is to stop letting others decide what your life is worth. Savannah feels different these days. The air is softer, or maybe I am. The porch still smells like coffee in the morning, the same rocking chair creaks beneath me, and the neighborhood kids still gather to listen to stories on Saturday afternoons. But there's something new in it all, a quiet dignity, a rhythm that hums with self-respect. Marcus comes by often with the children. Jaden likes to help me in the garden. Naomi sketches the flowers while Caleb chases lizards in the grass. They're growing into themselves, steady, thoughtful, kind. I can see in their eyes the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. It's the kind I once thought I had lost. Vanessa writes sometimes. The letters are short, cautious, full of apologies that feel halfway between guilt and growth. I don't always answer, but I always read them. I want to believe that people can change, that maybe one day she'll walk through my door, not as an enemy, not as a wound, but as someone who finally understands the weight of love. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that you finally learn to open from your own side. Saying no doesn't make you hard. It makes you honest. And taking care of yourself doesn't mean you've stopped loving others. It means you've started loving yourself too. The world still tests me, of course. Old habits try to sneak back in, moments where I almost say yes when I mean no. But then I remember that woman standing in her kitchen, phone in hand, smiling after being told she was free anyway. I remember how she decided, right then and there, to stop being anyone's afterthought. Now, when I sit by the window at dusk, I don't think about the places I didn't go. I think about the home I built inside myself. I think about how freedom doesn't always come with a suitcase. Sometimes it comes with a decision to stay, to heal, to teach the next generation that respect begins where fear ends. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive. And if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story with love and respect.